Cool. Second work session of the day, short-term rental work session here, and Tiffany and Heidi.
Okay, so I don't know, it's been a couple months now. Kind of went through and asked you guys what you wanted to talk about regarding short-term rentals. This is what I believe we heard. So I'm just willing to go down it one at a time. First one being a local short-term rental program. Do you guys want to reduce the short-term rental fee for local residents? Uh, and then kind of Heidi and I talking about it and things that popped into our minds. My biggest thing would be, what's a local? How do I define a local? Because I know how I define a local, but other people in the community define locals differently.
Has anybody talked to Nick about this yet? Cause,
Not on this, no.
okay, I worry that we can't reduce the fee because the fees are specifically to cover the cost of the program. And if they were any higher than that, they would be illegal. So that makes me think that if we were to reduce this, it would have to come out of our budget, pay the fees into the short-term rental budget. So that it could be done, and then that just looks bad, because now we're just subsidizing a short-term renter for rental rather than, waiving a fee. But
And I would say, so there's there's a question on the application, about 20 people say their primary residence is in Mount Crested Butte. Looking at it, that's not a correct number. When I think of the true locals, when I look at people with Crested Butte, Mount Crested Butte addresses, I would say it's maybe 10. And like, there is a buffer built into our budget. It's not a lot. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. So I wouldn't be too worried about that, but I'm happy to ask the question.
I just feel like it would open us up to liability from people who aren't locals renting the house. To be able to say, oh, they could be running it cheaper than they are, but they're not. That kind of thing.
I thought it was hilarious that 10 of those people got out of
Mhm.
area area.
Yep.
And I agree with Bruce. I just, we can only do so much work monitoring. I just think, just have a set fee and say, we don't have to worry about defining local or monitoring and just, make it as easy as you can to manage them.
Anybody
Yeah.
else?
I'll agree with Bobby, despite, like, in addition to the legal issues, I'm not particularly interested in. So,
How do you define local? I mean, I've always just viewed, if you're a registered voter in Mount Crested Butte, I consider you local.
I would say I want to see a driver's license with the Mount Crested Butte address on it. And you're registered to vote.
Registration.
Because technically, I could live in Louisiana 6 months out of the year, but I'm gonna call Mount Crested Butte my permanent residence, and I'm gonna register to vote in Mount Crested Butte. Or you could technically play the game and switch it. So I would want to see a driver's license, and I know that anyone can get a driver's license with a but to me, when you get that driver's license with your Mount Crested Butte address and you're registered to vote, I would say those two things. Maybe even include an affidavit too. This is my primary residence. I live in it full-time year round.
well, I think we'd also want to limit the days to get the fee waived.
Mhm.
Like, if you're renting 14 days or less, then yeah, we could waive the fee if you're local. But if you're renting it like 6 months out of the year while you're, splitting time in Louisiana, then, well, you're making enough money to pay your own fee.
Mhm. And depending on the size of your rental, I mean, the fee, 2 or 3 nights a year, and you paid for the $400 fee.
Yeah, I'm not super hung up on the fee stuff much. Other than if we have legal maneuverability to allow a local program that didn't require. I'm kind of getting through this brainstorming, but. Yeah, so, because you still need safety inspections associated with it regardless, so. And that's going to that too, though. That covers the entire application program.
Mhm.
Yeah.
could also be a reduced fee, like it could be half the price and you're limited to 60 nights a year. And if you want to rent it more than 60 nights a year, then you pay the full price.
So thank you, Heidi. That was in line with what I was thinking originally when this first came up and we were talking about putting it on here. Was like a day cap for locals, like folks who are really just gonna rent it out when they're on vacation or if they leave for a month, and it gives them a little flexibility to cover increasing costs of living and taxes and whatnot. What do you guys think about it?
Seems like the only thing that we're trying to help people do is save a little bit on the registration.
Which is
Why not just enter the program like anybody else?
Especially a 60-day limit, like 3 days pays for it.
2
Yeah.
days.
I mean, going down the road of that restricted conversation
The next one.
with rental, that makes sense of like building in some guardrails, but other than somebody being able to knock $200 off the registration, what's the point of trying to qualify for this?
Cool.
I agree totally.
Next up, Tiffany.
Okay, number 2. I don't think there's a lot to talk about with number 2, but it was mentioned about allowing deed restricted properties to operate as short-term rentals. Under current deed restrictions, it is not allowed, but if that's something you wanted to build in to the, like you're dealing with the maroon house deed restriction. But I think if you were to do that, you guys would want some strong barriers on that.
I think if you are given an opportunity to have a deed restricted house, you need to live in it and not use it as an use. Period.
Well, I'd say that if you were to grant some kind of provision for it, it's better addressed in the deed restriction and not in the chapter.
Yeah.
Chapter 19 is like you can short-term rent. And if the deed restriction allows for it, then that's all they would need to know for the short-term rental licenses.
And as a deed restricted, you are also not allowed to short-term rent like a bedroom. There's no short-term renting allowed.
Right, roommates even have to qualify or previously did.
In some cases, some deed restrictions will.
Yeah. So currently, if a deed restriction wanted to rent a bedroom, they come to you?
They would have to get a short-term rental license and we would deny them because it's a deed restricted.
Well,
Short-term rent.
sorry. Yeah, no, I was thinking just in general. Are we handling that now in-house for deed restricted roommates?
But one, it would depend on the deed restriction. And then 2, if it were to come up, yes, we would review. Have in the 4 months that we've been doing it, we have not had any. And it's not something we necessarily go after qualify your roommates either.
Okay, housing authority.
Or either, yeah, or I don't know, having lived in a neighborhood, I don't know if there's anything I've ever, well, I'll use myself as an example. With my former partner, I was a renter, quote unquote renter in her unit. I was never qualified by anybody to be in that unit. So would we do it? Yes. Do we do it? I mean, that's only been 4 months. I would say no.
I just didn't know if that's articulated somewhere, like somebody who did have a deed restriction, if they wanted to ensure that they were in compliance, would they have a means to go to the website, or how would they understand this process is?
They would reach out to us and we put them in contact with Kirsten and she would review their deed restriction and she would work with them. If they were to contact us.
Awesome. Sweet. What's your thought?
I see this really applying to the deed restrictions before, sort of now, where HOA dues became out of control and special assessments and people are just trying to keep up. And we're trying to solve for that now, the sort of right sizing of dues moving forward. in principle, I understand how it could be beneficial with a special assessment for the roof, the windows, or whatever. I don't disagree with Bobby's point that, I mean, somebody gets levied a huge special assessment and the money might be in. So but I don't think it matters what we do with this, if it's big on the restriction. We would have to allow it in future deed restrictions and then create this program.
But remember, they also say you long-term rent if you have a special, as long as you get permission. So if you had an issue where like, oh my, I was, I'm being assessed $10,000. And so maybe I could long-term rent for 3 or 4 months and recoup that. But as long as you get permission from the town, you can long-term rent for a valid reason, that would be a valid reason.
You're saying long-term at a market.
Anything over 30 days.
Yeah.
Would be a long-term.
The way most of the deed restrictions are written for you to do that, at least the ownership based ones are, if you have like a family emergency, like, oh, my mom I have to go back east to take care of my mom who's sick, and so I need to leave for 4 months. There are provisions that allow for stuff like that, and they're very clear is that you can't charge more than your expenses, like your mortgage, your utilities, and not intended in the language, it's not intended to be an income producing, a revenue producing asset.
Right.
Yeah.
The housing authority, 3 housing authority directors ago when it existed, there was a unit, Lazy J, those first ones built in Pitchfork. And one of the residents there applied for that because his mom was ill on the East Coast. So he was moving back there. So he looked into what he could rent it for. And she had an equation that she utilized that spit out the number to him. And it was $19.50 for a 1-bedroom, 1-bath in Pitchfork. And that's way above. I think the original price on the place was $79,000.
Yeah.
So it seems like, to your point, that wasn't being done or utilized for a period there.
Well, I know that Pitchfork deed restriction doesn't have an equation, I believe, built into it.
For allowing
What the
a roommate.
I don't know what the basis of that calculation was, to be quite honest.
You're also assuming that this stellar director did the right.
It was 3 directors ago. That's all I can say. So do most of the deed restrictions that you've seen have that provision you're talking about?
The one we're talking about now, like to leave, I think both Pitchfork and Homestead, which are the 2 primary ones we have, you have to use it as your primary residence a minimum of 9 months out of the year. And so you basically can leave for 3 months. We have an example of a family that is a ski patroller and a teacher during school season in the winter, and they leave for 3 months. And they work somewhere else, and under that provision, they're permitted to do so. They've had renters in the past, and under that provision, they're allowed to have renters too, but they can't charge market rates. Has to be a qualified renter, and then there's limits on what they can rent for.
What's your thought, Bruce? I'm all over on this one.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same. I would not be opposed to allowing somebody to short-term rent their place for 14 days a year, just to make a little bit extra cash, like maybe 14 days and a maximum of 3 different rentals or something like that.
Again, this topic is not
But
really relevant to what we're talking about here. It needs to be built into deed
yeah,
restriction.
it needs to be in the deed restriction, for sure. But yeah, like if we don't add it to deed restrictions, I'm not gonna be upset about that. If we do add a significantly like curtailed something to the deed restrictions, I'd be fine with it. But it's really not at the top of my priority list to even talk about, to be honest, so.
And Carlos, you're saying that this needs to, is there a process to amend previous deed restrictions to allow that?
Yes,
For you to be, the homeowner would apply to amend it, I presume?
the grantor and the grantees of the deed restriction would have to mutually agree to amend the deed restriction to them.
And then if there was still debt on the property, they would probably need to have the lender authorize the adjustment?
Apparently so. You know, I've heard different things about, not necessarily that that's required, but I've heard that in Colorado, that's not this huge hurdle. That it's kind of made out to be. I don't know if that's true or not, but I've heard it from two different sources now from the legal side that, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. So what I'm saying though is if, you know, say we put the language into this short-term rental section, if the deed restriction precludes it, then the deed restriction is what would govern. So really, I don't think you need to change anything here. The deed restriction specifically permitted it, then it would just fall under the plain language of the code section. Yeah.
Deed restrictions need to address number of days, all those.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, you ready for number 3? Okay, so this was brought up by Steve. He suggested potentially an increase to the STR excise tax for non-DDA rentals. I will say I was kind of pushing this a little bit because there was a bill in front of the legislature to not allow excise taxes on short-term rentals. From what I understand, that's gone away. It was never voted on, it failed in subcommittee or something like that. But it is something, especially the more that Airbnb and VRBO start lobbying. There's short-term rental groups that lobby. Just saying, if you want to do it, you might want to consider it sooner rather than later.
Does the increase in tax need to be a ballot measure?
It would be, yeah. And that's another reason for me putting it on here now. Is if you guys want to move forward, there's a lot of steps we have to take before to get it on the ballot in November.
When, by when?
I have to have final ballot language by the beginning of September, roughly,
And when do you need to know that there's going to be something?
as soon as, I mean, once,
Don't you have to let them know that?
I have to let the county, I don't know the exact date, but I could tell once you guys are like, yeah, we're gonna do this, we just need to create the ballot language, then I let them know. I mean, they send me a letter, they want to know in February. And I'm like, that's way too early for us.
Didn't we just, in the last election, raise the taxes for STRs, and you want to raise them again the next time we vote?
2 years ago.
2 years.
Yeah, and we went from 2.9% to 4.9.
I think this is just last year.
Oh, was it? Oh, yeah, okay, 25.
Yeah.
So that, it just seems that we just raise the taxes to go or try to.
It's 24. I mean, it hasn't been a full 2 years, but when this election comes around, it will have been 2.
Thought we approved it in 2025 and it went into effect in 2026.
Here, I'll tell you.
I mean, I
The
know.
lodging, it went into effect January 2025. The tax increase did.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and to clarify too, I don't have a position on this either way. I'm bringing this up solely because looking at one, the lay of the land and some of the things Tiffany's talking about, we're also relatively low in the grand scheme of STR taxes in the state. My concern is hitting a tipping point where people we lose retention of guests who would come back for a second visit. And does this impact our tourism? I've been, the digging I've been doing in conversations I've been having, it doesn't, there isn't anything tangible that I can find that shows these declines associated with tourism taxes, lodging tax increases, resort fees. And that was my biggest concern, would be the impact to the overall economy, and are we stifling that in some way? It doesn't totally feel like that. And I also look at our STR fund, which is pretty depleted until probably beginning of 28 still.
Until we pay off the direct loans, yes.
Yeah, so,
Direct leases.
so the other idea is just, is it better to have more money to work with to solve our problems?
So what are the average states? So you said we're pretty low, so what's the range?
Tiffany, you don't have that accessible, do you, that chart that you guys sent out? Well, like
No.
your raise 29%.
And I would say you raised, I believe, the highest in the state.
Yes, yeah, I think it might be like 29.5 actually.
Mhm.
But it seemed like 10 to 12 was sort of standard. Summit County had a lot of 4.9s to 9.9. I'll have to find.
We're not the lowest, we're on the lower end. We're not in the middle. Crested Buttes higher than us, I know that much.
Well, it also depends on how you look at it. You know, if you just look at it as the short-term rental tax or the excise tax, that might be true, but if you look at overall lodging tax, I think we get it at a higher quarter or more with overall lodging tax, but let me.
I'd be willing to have that conversation, and this may be setting something up for the near future. If we look at maybe a parallel conversation and initiative to alter the LMV tax through the voters and bring that number down a bit.
Wait,
because-
I'm sorry, Roman, I missed that, an alternate what?
Like a parallel initiative to put a ballot measure on that lowers the LMD tax.
Okay,
Which would be countywide.
that would be
It
countywide.
would be countywide, because with the county's roads and bridges proposal, that's pushing our tax over 10%, which is insane. So,
The sales tax.
yeah, sales tax, so I'd be willing to play around with that, and probably try to do something unique, like actually bring certain taxes down rather than just continuously raise them and bring in some more balance.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, Bruce.
I mean, I was just kind of shrugging, I mean, the LMD tax, like, if it goes down, that's great. I don't know how much we need more money from roading or what, but
Or whatever else.
yeah, yeah, like, I'd have to look into it more to see whether I think that really needs to go down or not. Because it does just apply to lodging, it's not gonna go down like current 9.9% sales tax, we move that at all. But I'm more interested in how we eliminate this to things outside of the DDA, which I think is a fantastic idea. I'm just not sure that's the best way to limit it. Like when I was just Googling what, taxes are around the state, I guess Aspen has specifically a 5% excise tax for owner occupied and 10% for non-owner occupied, so that might be a cool thing to do. And then also they have a lodge exemption, so if there's a way we can do a lodge exemption to exempt the hotels, but not exempt, every, condo that happens to be in the DDA boundary, that might be a better way to do it.
That's awesome. I wonder if these are questions for Nick too. But it sounds like it's already in play and has a challenge on this.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like Aspen does it. I mean, this is literally the AI overview I got from Google 30 seconds ago, so take it for what it's worth.
Do you guys have any thoughts on over taxation in tourist markets in general? Like when you go, they generally don't ask the price of lobster on vacation, it's just market and I pay it.
Yeah,
I
well,
use that only as an example of like a lot of times people go and there's just inherent things that come with the places you choose to go. Do you ever check the tax rates and go somewhere based on what your out the door cost is gonna be?
well, and I'll go ahead, Bobby.
I
didn't think
I
you were
don't
saying-
check the tax rates, but like when we're looking for a VRBO, and you look at what the cost is, and then all of a sudden it's almost double. When you look at, by the time they add all the taxes, we're like, Just get a hotel room for 3 nights instead of rent VRBO. So I think that sometimes keeps people from doing it.
Well, I think that if somebody chooses to get a hotel room instead of a VRBO, I'm excited about that outcome. Like, I would
Right,
much
I
rather
can
somebody
see
be
that
staying in the
logic.
Grand Lodge than staying at Pitchfork. Like,
But I mean, I'm sure other people.
I sort of look at this as a long play of where we can trick people to come here once. But when they come here and the product isn't what they're paying for, they might not come back. And if certain people will remember the It's Time to Shine campaign, the CBMR, that was their slogan, and they had but they changed their logo to the poo pile with like the stink lines on it. You remember
Is
that?
that like
I do not remember that.
I don't remember
The mountain looked like, kind of like a pile of
Steam
crap, and like the sun lines looked like poop.
Yeah.
And people showed up and there was the big hole in the base area. And they're like, where is this shine? You know, like we've tricked people to come here and people may not have come back if they didn't have the experience that they had. So,
And that's my concern is what's the overall retention impact? And
you know,
it might be a conversation too, to talk with Andrew and some of the folks at TAP may have some insight into that just from their metrics and all that stuff. I'm not sure.
ask first before we have that LMD conversation.
For sure.
I do have that tax rate table up.
Oh, sweet.
We'll look at it, if you have any questions on it.
yeah, and so, I mean, whether or not we choose to raise the excise tax, regardless, I will still be down to explore removing the excise tax or lowering it for places that are in the DDA. Or places that are lodges.
Now, our only two true hotels be the Elevation and the Nordic Inn.
It's really just the Nordic Inn because the elevation is condominium.
They're condominium, right? So it would only benefit in the long run, the Nordic Inn.
That's a legal question too, and one that's
Those
been
grandmas
asked.
would qualify, wouldn't they? Because they still have restrictions on how long, an
The
emergency.
Grand Lodge is questionable. And if we're lowering the excise tax on them, then I want them to get a short-term rental license, but that's just me.
They don't have one.
Nope.
Because they are a hotel.
Because they are required to short-term rent. So because they are required to short-term rent, we don't make them get a short-term rental license. And that goes back to when we first created the short-term rental licensing program, they were included. And they raised such a ruckus that the town manager backed down and said, no, we won't require them.
Okay.
At that time, CBMR managed most of their units. Now the fact that they don't have a front desk, now the fact that they're starting to creep up into that 50% that are doing their own thing, that are not going through CBMR, I would like to revisit that.
I wouldn't say
But-
it's fair. I wasn't the manager at the time.
He was not.
I would not say it's fair to characterize it as the manager because it was ultimately the council that voted on the language to put it in there.
That's what I would say.
Yeah,
It was pretty,
but it was in about the raising the sink is 100% accurate. But it was more, the outcome was, they didn't have a choice to short-term rent because they were required to short-term rent under the,
but now they can long-term rent.
yeah.
They have a choice.
And Nordic in that scenario doesn't pay for a license.
Not for, and Nordic does not pay for, they pay the pillow fee.
Yeah.
They do not pay for a short-term rental license for the inn. They do pay for it for 34 Whetstone or 37 Whetstone. And I think they also pay for it for the chalet.
Yes, 18 Treasury.
So
Okay.
their outlying properties, they pay for it.
Do those outlying properties have independent STR licenses or?
They do.
Oh, they do?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Maybe I was manager at the time.
You were not.
That might have been when
No,
I
you were not.
was it when I was
No.
the interim?
You were not.
Yeah.
Even if you were, you weren't.
No, I didn't. No, it was,
Yeah.
Carlos had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, but anybody that is required to short-term rent through declaration or their business through zoning, which is the Nordic, does not pay for a license.
Yeah.
But they all still pay tax, the lodging taxes.
Yeah, and that might be the right place to draw the line, is if you're required to short-term rent then maybe you have a lower excise tax. Cause my only issue with the excise tax from last time around, which, I'm glad it passed, but I don't like punishing the hotels when we're trying to fix a problem that's caused by short-term rentals. When hotels are, where we want people to stay.
Yeah, and it becomes a legal question at that point, because I think in that scenario, we couldn't differentiate the two.
Yeah.
For legally for taxing them. We've asked the question, I don't know if we've got a final answer on that. Can we tax differently within the DEA versus other parts of town? So that's a
And
question.
Nick did say that if they wanted to, he still wants time to write up a legal opinion about that, if that's the direction you guys are going. And then I guess my next,
Another option might be if they're paying commercial taxes, they get a lower excise tax.
I
And if
don't
they're
think
not-
they can do that.
That's where the initial discussion started way back when we started this of, can we, because, a house that's a short-term rental on Anthracite is paying residential taxes, where the hotel elevation is paying 27% and 27% different in taxes.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and that's why I would like to, remove them from that, is because.
But I think what we found,
Kind of
don't
their fair share.
quote me on this, is that elevation in Grand Lodge, since they were condominiumized, they're treated as residential properties
Yes.
and were then assessed at the residential rate. So I think again, the only
That's a correct statement.
group you would be separating out would be the Nordic.
And I feel like we asked that question one time and we were told, no, we can't differentiate that way. But I'm willing to ask it again because I'm not 100% remembering.
And I should note, this idea originally Lauren Colliker was a former counselor, and in 2018, this was something she brought into the work session. That I have sort of revitalized, but it is not my original creation.
So for the four of you on this topic, one, do you want us to have Nick Klein do more research? Do you want to revisit this again? Because we do have other things that I want to get to.
Yes.
Revisit it again and have Nick do the research?
Yeah, I think it's worth keeping the conversation.
Okay, Roman, Bobby?
Sure.
Okay. I'm just making a note. Okay, the next one is number 4, rental of individual bedrooms. This is something we definitely have one property in Mount Christa Butte that is under one STR license, but it is operating as it's a hotel. You book individual bedrooms, there's 10 bedrooms. It is what it is. It's currently for sale, so it's a good time to talk about it. But if you, but also instead of just picking on them, you buy a house up in Prospect that's 7 bedrooms. I understand a Prospect homeowner probably wouldn't do that, but someone could buy it and rent out 7 individual bedrooms. I would like you guys to consider, if you're going to rent out individual bedrooms, you're only able to rent out maybe 2 or 3 to unrelated guests. And that's my reasoning, because I feel like once you're renting out 5 bedrooms to 5 individual parties that are not related, it's not like 5 college friends or completely different parties. To me, that's a hotel. That's not a short-term rental.
Yeah, I think if you're renting an individual bedroom, the reason that you're doing it that way is because you're moving in place. Like, I mean,
And we've got at least one owner that does do that. We've got another one that is a second homeowner that he's got 2 chateau units, and I'm sure there's times when he's rented out individual bedrooms and all those.
Definitely.
So, yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, I did that when I was living in Pittsburgh. We had one STR license, we had paid 2 pillow fees because it was like a king bed or something, and we were living there, and it was a way to generate some additional income that we,
Yeah, you rented out 1 bedroom.
1 bedroom.
yeah,
And I think anything more than that to separate people, I'm not in favor of.
Yeah,
It's like one or the whole thing.
totally, like, and to me, I could even accept owner occupied. Maybe they could rent too, if I live in my house, my kids have gone away to college. Like, maybe there's a scenario, but I don't even know if we need to mince it, cause it's, one, probably not happening a ton, and to your point, yeah, but if you're gonna be there, then. So maybe just call it single party
It
rentals.
was weird enough, move on.
Did you imagine? Well, like, if, like 37 Whetstone would be a good example. If Nordic chisels that off, sells it, that's 12 bedrooms.
Mhm.
You
Well-
could run that.
And it's currently being rented like a hotel.
Yeah,
Well,
okay.
take your scenario would be, you weren't there, but you were renting it out to two separate
I'm not okay.
parties.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, and there are parking issues that come with that too, because 37 wet zones.
They tell people to park at the Nordic Inn and take first tracks up.
Is that what they tell people? Because many times I see like somebody with a, you know, F-150 or larger that's parked over there, and their bumper is like into the road. Like, it just, I didn't realize that that's why I kept seeing that, because it's not just one group that carpooled, it's, you know, 7 different groups of people when they can't move it to the longer spot because they don't know that guy.
Mhm.
Would it make sense just to make a single party rule? Just like-
Owner occupied single party or just single party?
It could encompass everything, where you could have two. One is, you know, an owner occupied that sort of is, has some more leniency to it based on being local or owner occupied, but overall, I can see a single thing that just says if you have an STR license, that's for one rental party.
One bedroom.
Do we have?
So we-
Only matters just one
Right, so
bedroom.
in Roman's case would still be fine, because you're renting to one party, and
Yeah.
owner's there, so I don't know that you need to separate owner occupied even, you could just.
You can only rent to one party at a time.
At a time.
Yeah.
I mean, do we have a way we could actually enforce this?
We would, and it would be difficult to enforce, I believe, but we would enforce it by reviewing their listings. Cause
I do-
Heidi,
Yeah, I do want to add that there are what I call lock-off units. For example, at Lodge Mountaineer Square, the Chateau, where there is a bedroom that has a separate entrance into the main hallway. And it is real feasible, and people are currently doing this, where you have a 2 or a 3 bedroom condo and you lock off that one bedroom, you rent it as a hotel. And then the rest of the condo, the remaining 1 bedroom, the living room and the kitchen that has a separate entrance, is rented to a separate group. So I would kind of steer more towards 2, just because of those lock-off situations that we are currently allowing.
Chateau
Or-
does too.
yeah, Chateau has the lock-off units too. I can talk to Nick about language to encompass one rental party or the lock-off units, if you guys are interested in doing this.
I mean, I think I'm fine with 2 as well, like, that's not obscene, like. Maybe you have a 3-bedroom house and you rent out 2 bedrooms, like. Upset about that.
Is it the bedrooms or the configuration? Because if there's a unit that's specifically meant to be locked off and utilized that way, that's different than multiple parties. And, you know, parking's addressed through the listing. So how does that work with like multiple bedrooms in a place that doesn't have enough parking? Like, are you limited by the amount of parking you're allowed to have? If you're at a condo with, you can only have 2 spots and you're renting 3 bedrooms,
Someone is.
can you even do that based on the most
Mhm.
core part of the application process?
Yeah, I think that depends on how they list it. So I'm sure that place is probably listed 3 times. It's listed as a small 1-bedroom, a larger 1-bedroom, and also as a 2-bedroom. As soon as one of them moves, then another option drops off or something.
You're like,
That'd
3
be a Heidi's
listings.
question. You know, how are they applying and how many parking spaces are they saying they have access?
So for a chateau unit, for example, where they are renting that lock-off bedroom, and like Bruce just described, you'd have the 1 bedroom, the 2 bedroom, and then that hotel. And make sure that the hotel listing and the 1 bedroom listing are only allowed to advertise 1 parking spot, because there could potentially be 2 groups in there at the same time, and the full condo unit is only allowed the 2 parking spaces. Whereas the full 2 bedroom listing is allowed to advertise both of those parking spaces.
Right, but if all of those are full, then they've exceeded their allotment of parking.
But the unit's still limited to 2 vehicles per the parking plan. The full unit is still limited, so each side is of the lock-off only gets 1 parking space.
So how many spaces does the main unit get?
2
And then
in the chateau example.
just one each as well? No.
No,
The chateau gets 2 parking spaces per unit. So if it's being rented as a lock-off, each side of the lock-off only gets 1 parking space.
Well, yeah, I get what you're saying, Roman. It's not perfect, but it is what we can do. And I do know Chateau issues parking passive. So yeah,
Yes. So it seems like it seems like parking would be the tipping point for abuse anyway, and if somebody was really abusing this, the odds of them violating the parking is significant. And then it would require somebody to call in and file an actual complaint on it and witness it and stuff, so,
and I don't think we get parking complaints from Chateau.
yeah. Yeah, maybe the past thing is working.
you'd think if there were issues that, I mean, the bus goes right through there and around, so if someone was parking where they shouldn't be, if Chateau didn't complain, Mountain Express would very quickly.
Yeah, yeah. So.
And
Oh, go ahead, Heidi.
I was just gonna say the HOA at a lot of these condo complexes they strictly enforce parking too, because they get so many skier poachers poaching parking. So the HOAs are in a lot of cases cracking down on parking.
Okay, so it sounds like you're comfortable with 2 unrelated parties. And we need to address the lock-off units within there too. So you guys want me to move forward on that?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, number 5 is, it was more for put on here for Valita, but she's not here. Conversion of SDRs to long-term rentals. I kind of wish she was here. Because all of our research says that 95% of your short-term rentals, they're short-term renting it so they can use their property. They're not gonna long-term rent it because that limits their time that they can use it. There's also studies, I mean, Heidi mentions one in Telluride. There's studies across the board that says that if incentivizing short-term rental owners to flip to, it just doesn't do it. It doesn't move you might get 1 or 2, but it's not gonna move your needle on affordable housing much. And we even had, Roman, you might remember, I think it was the Housing Matters program, might have been called that, to try to incentivize those short-term rental owners. I know that nothing really came about that, but I also know there wasn't really any advertising, or it was just thrown together and put out there, and that was about it. No one took advantage of it. I don't even think anyone contacted us about it.
No.
And for a short-term rental owner to incentivize them to switch to long-term rentals, you're paying $10,000 a month, is what the town would be subsidizing them.
I think it's like some county, it's over 6 feet. I think it's in the 100K plus range, like 120 or something, to acquire through those programs, because our program was originally that Vale's and D program.
Mm-hmm.
And then some county and Vale have both seen a rise in folks engaging those programs in the last few years. But it's trivial, a lot of it's single digits though. That's for those large communities. So I haven't been able to find any research, and I've dug into this one a lot in that meetings with Lita and some about it. We also had a housing summit up here at Elevation, it was raucous, and there was a ton of community members came out. It was when we were considering the moratorium for STR licenses. So we had a community event to get a pulse on things. And it was probably 90% of the people that got up and spoke were saying, I'm not going to rent the place long term. It was staggering how many people were like, there's no chance. And it was exactly that. The kids come here for 2 weeks in winter, we're here in summer, whatever it is. So I haven't seen, same with Tiffany, I haven't found anything that supports that creates inventory. There's significant enough to make any major shifts or apply it. So that might be something I think if Volita comes back with some substantial information that could bring it back around, then maybe we can do it.
Financially, we're paying somebody to be whole from short term. You know, we're like, yes, we gain a long-term rental, maybe, but we paid for it. So why not just put that money towards something else?
Yeah.
Towards more, at $10,000 a month, let's put it more towards affordable housing.
I would
Okay.
say another,
Oh.
I just want to add one more reason that that people wouldn't necessarily want a long-term rent is that they have invested a lot of money in remodeling, in higher end appliances, more expensive furniture. Then, most long-term rentals are unfurnished. So that would be another reason that people wouldn't be interested in long-term renting, is because they have invested in making their home so much nicer.
Thanks, Heidi.
All right, number 6. I'm going to do my best with this one. So prior to us accepting the 2021 building codes, if you had a sleeping area, you had to have 2 emergency and rescue openings. So if this was a bedroom, you'd have the window as 1 and the doorway as 2, so you could escape. Now that we've accepted these new building codes, it's gotten more convoluted and complicated. In certain buildings, you no longer need those 2 exits. So for example, like in Paradise condos, if there is, a lot of times there is like a stairway landing where they will put a bed, or a loft where they will put a sleeper sofa or a bed. And because when you leave that unit, you can go right or left. You got 2 exits out. So that unit does not need the EEROs in that sleeping area. It's a little bit more complicated, but that's kind of what I've gathered from Heidi. So one suggestion Heidi suggested that I think is something to consider is overall limiting the number of occupants in a unit. And I know Crested Butte, I know a lot of towns that do this, where it's 2 people per bedroom, and then an extra 2 people, like in a sleeper sofa in a living room. And just the reasoning being, if you've got, let's say, a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom, if you've got 12 people in there, there's a fire, it takes a lot more time to get those 12 people out of there than 8 people. So that's the discussion for you guys. You had to have all the handles too.
It helps. Feel the passion. I don't have a problem with occupancy limits. I've been shocked sometimes to see some of these clown car rentals where people just keep flowing out, and you're going like, where were all these people? Like, this is shocking. So to me, it makes sense. I would just want to make sure we take into consideration, a lot of places have the dual bunk beds, for kids. And so I would want to figure out a way to accommodate for 2 people per bedroom plus.
And it could be +2, it could be +4. I can think of at least 1 unit in Mount Crested Butte that she crams, and I know there's others, but I've got a long history with this homeowner. Not a bad history, but a long history where she crams as many people as she can into her house.
And some of the houses, like I have one across the street from us, it's a VRBO, and they have a bunk room. It's really popular because they have 3 like master suites in there, and then they have a bunk room for kids, and they can sleep like 4 or 5 kids, and it's all little, it looks like a dorm.
Right.
But, I don't know how you deal with that in your wording.
Well, it would come from you guys, and it would be, how do you want to limit occupancy? And that's one suggestion, 2 per bedroom plus 2 extra If you wanted to go 2 per bedroom plus 4 extra, 6, 7, 8, that's 10 people in a 3-bedroom. 2, 4, 6, yeah.
And then do 4 extra, if you were gonna do it.
Yeah.
I sort of just like 2 per bedroom, but I know a lot of people have sleeper sofas, so I could do 2 per bedroom plus 2.
2 adults per bedroom? I'm just saying, because sometimes it's easy to stack a ton of kids in a room. And my concern comes from the more adult parties you have, the more cars you have, the other things that get strained. Whereas like a couple extra kids in a bunk bedroom doesn't really, to me, that's not a problem we're trying to solve necessarily.
I mean, 2 adults per bedroom is kind of just your normal couple. Like, that's it. Fine. Kids, my concern about kids is that in an evacuation scenario, they're harder to get out.
I'll take the fireman's.
Well, I mean, that's not even really anything, fire stuff, like, that's just me applying logic to it in my mind. On the other hand, I might be better at it because they run fire drills every month, so, you know, I haven't done one since high school.
That's the last one. I'm sort of struggling with the example of you can go right or left out the front door. Exit, that's following that.
I
You still have the one exit out of the lot, right?
Yep, I really struggle with that, and Heidi has done the research, she talked to Todd. I think it's a horrible thing, because yes, I struggle with, well, if there's a fire at the stairwell, how I have to go through the fire to get out of the condo. So I struggle with it too, but it's the building code that we
Does that mean
adopted.
basements don't have to have an egress out the window anymore?
Heidi, let's picture a paradise.
Well, it only applies to R2 occupancy groups, which are condo units that fall under specific, very specific guidelines. So this does not apply to single family homes or townhomes. It only applies to some of our condos. So it's a little bit complicated, but it's just the way that the code reads, that they changed the code, I think, to make it a little bit more, a little less strict, to make it a little more accommodating for people for new builds. But it's the code officials made the determination that if you leave a unit and you have 2 exits from the building, once you leave that unit, that's the way the code is written nowadays for R2 occupancy groups. But a lot of our condos, you leave the front door and you do not have 2 exits, like Axtell and Emmons. You exit the unit and you are on a stairway and you have 1 stairway down. So it wouldn't apply to the Axtell or Emmons. It's a little complicated because it's not blanket for all of our condos. It depends on whether you have access to 2 exits when you leave the unit or not.
So Heidi, when she would be doing inspections, would look at what type of condo it is, house or whatnot. If it doesn't fall under the R2, then you have to have the 2 EEROs.
If it's below the 4th story.
Now, if you guys do an occupancy limit, we would apply it across the board. It would be way too complicated to say you get this and you don't.
I don't think the occupancy limit would affect that many units. So a 2-bedroom sleeping 6, or 6, that's
Yeah.
pretty common. A 3-bedroom sleeping 8, that's pretty common. A lot of owners, some owners don't want too many occupancies because they don't want the wear and tear. Other homeowners, they want to put as many people in there as possible so they raise the price. Everybody is a little bit different. I've talked to a couple of property managers, just to kind of feel them out. And I talked to CB Lodging you know, they made it sound like it wouldn't really affect that many of their units. And if it did, it would only reduce their occupancy by 1 or 2 people. So I've talked about other property managers too. I don't think it would really affect all that many units.
It currently, when they post rentals, like, as I'm looking at stuff, most of the listings that I see show a guest cap.
They all have to,
Right, okay.
yeah.
So we currently, whether that's being enforced or not, that's currently a standard in our.
Mhm. Yeah, they have to list it on all of their listings. And their short-term rental license says you're allowed 8 people that they post at the front door. It's only enforced when we get a complaint. Now, Heidi, here's a question. If we were to say that your house only can sleep, your 3-bedroom could only sleep 8 people, you go in there and do an inspection and there's more bedding, how would you handle that?
I think that's okay because you're still only allowed to advertise for 8. And if you have, you know, a situation where you have a bunk bed room and a sleeper sofa, and you know, somebody would rather sleep in the bunk bed than the sleeper sofa, I don't really see a problem with that, but you can't be advertising more than what you're allowed to per your license.
And I would have to say, I mean, I personally just booked an Airbnb that, looking at the amount of beds in the unit, could sleep 8 to 10 people, but it clearly states you're only allowed 6 people. So, I mean, that's my real world example. We're pretty much out of time. Do you guys want to talk about this some more in a work session, hoping that more people show up? Do you want me to go ahead and draft language that says 2 per bedroom plus 2, and then we can discuss it again at an ordinance? Roman's nodding his head. What about the other 3?
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah, I think that works.
okay,
Cool.
okay. Wow, we got through all that. Thank
4
you.
minutes, still eating.
Take a short little break.
I don't think
Stop.
a business is